Good morning, Jay.
Good morning.
I'm here with Jay India. She is the host of the podcast Ulcerative Colitis, the Autoimmune Healing Journey. It is the number one inflammatory bowel disease podcast on Apple and Spotify. We're going to find out about her healing journey and how she got to that spot of number one. That's awesome. Many people are interested in this topic. And we don't really realize how many people are affected by inflammatory bowel disease. So, do you want to give us a little overview? Because I know people have digestive disorders, but this is one that a lot of people talk about as of recent. In the last 10 years, it seems that it's more and more common.
Well, JoAnne, thank you so much for having me. I'm honored to be here. This is very cool. We've been talking about this for a little while. I'm very excited. I'm going to make it very easy on you and the listeners. Inflammatory bowel disease, just call it IBD.
Mhm.
Ulcerative colitis, just call it UC from now on, and it just makes life easier. I do the same on my podcast, so there you go. Inflammatory bowel disease. Now, this one's very interesting. So if you asked me when I started my podcast 3 years ago, 2 years ago, I would have told you that IBD is an autoimmune disease. However, the Center for Disease Control just changed its definition. So now it is redefined as a genetic predisposition to gut lining, permeability, and susceptibility with the gut lining. And also, it is thought of as an environmental illness, so meaning biotoxins. So they've completely redefined it. So that's pretty exciting. People know inflammatory bowel disease because of ulcerative colitis, which means you have tears or ulcers in the colon, and also Crohn's disease. That's probably the more popular one, where that is an inflammation of the digestive tract. And the digestive tract goes from your mouth all the way down to your butt, is what I tell people. So that is the definition for inflammatory bowel disease.
Yeah, thank you. I know being in holistic wellness for the last 2 decades, it's people seem to, pop a pill, they'll do Pepsid C or they'll do Tums or they kind of pass it over until it becomes really irritated. And then they're having a lot of issues where they have to run to the toilet. Can you tell me what set off or when you sort of landed on that diagnosis? What was happening to you? Was it gradual or did it all of a sudden come on? Can you give the listeners in a little bit of your journey, how you discovered it?
Yeah, that's actually a really pertinent question because everything started for me in 2016. In 2016, I started to bleed, meaning rectal bleeding. And as you're told, as probably many of your listeners have been told, that, oh, it's just a hemorrhoid, right? It's just a hemorrhoid. We're all told that. I didn't think anything of it. I was in a stressful job, not overly stressful, but stressful in my body in regard to traveling to different time zones, a lot of fatigue, that type of thing. And then I had a relationship. I'm American, you can hear that. And I had a relationship in Australia in 2016. So I went down there for 3 or 4 months and things didn't go well. I'm not with the person. Things didn't go well. Right. And there was a lot of stress down there and my symptoms got worse and worse. So then between 2016 to 2021, I was up and down. So some of my symptoms, some days were not even there and I was feeling pretty good and my stomach's flat and I'm digesting fine. And then the next week I'm not doing well. And so everything took a deep dive in mid 2021. I went into what I call, and you're going to hear later that it was actually something else. So catch 22 here, little suspense here, right? So it was actually something else, but what I knew to be a UC flare, an ulcerative colitis flare. And what happened is, so for example, I would take these walks, JoAnne, and I could walk for an hour and a half, 2 hours sometimes. And I live in a very hilly area. And then when mid 2021 hit, I could maybe walk for 20 minutes and I was dying. I was dying. I couldn't
Mhm.
do it. So keep in mind, this is 2021. So I'm thinking, okay, it's probably COVID. And I'm just not doing well. I have this underlying COVID or something. But they weren't the symptoms of COVID. So then I start getting weird things like migraines. I'm getting something called blepharitis, which is an eye parasite. I was shocked on that one. Horrible rosacea. And the big guns were I was getting colon spasms. And at the height of my flare, I was getting 50, that's 50 colon spasms a day that people compare to childbirth contractions. And when I was going to the bathroom, when I was going number two, sorry guys, it's about to get gory. When I was going number two, when I was going
Okay.
number two, I was just pooing out blood and there was nothing solid coming out. So obviously things were wrong. Then everything descended even worse because I became bedbound for weeks. I became housebound for months. I did not want to eat. I couldn't even stand the smell of food. I'm a huge water drinker. I have water right here, huge drinker. And I couldn't even stand the sight of water. It was getting that bad. I finally, long story short, healed myself a little bit, enough to where I could get myself to a physician. And this is a really important part of the story, guys. This is a huge part of the story. Is I'm not one that goes to the doctor a lot. I go, once a year, maybe to get a physical, that type of thing. Gynecologist once a year, that type of thing. I try to do everything naturally and holistically. Although going on this UC journey, with my listeners, I realize that Western medicine definitely has a big part in this as well. So anyway, I go to my physician. She doesn't know what's wrong. She says, we have to get you into a gastroenterologist. Coincidentally, or not coincidentally, I had an appointment 6 weeks later with a gastroenterologist who was highly recommended to me. But that was 6 weeks later. And I had made the appointment months before. And for those of your listeners who are international in the US, if you find an amazing specialist, it takes months to get in. Yeah. It can take up to a year or even more to get in. So why this is so key to keep a good relationship with a physician is because my physician called that gastroenterologist and said, we need to get this woman in right now. And I went into that gastroenterologist's office 4 days later. Long story short, I was diagnosed through a colonoscopy, right, which is the procedure where they go into your, how would I explain it? Go into your colon and there is a camera and they look all around and they take biopsies and all of that. And I was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis, or UC. When I was on this journey, I wasn't finding anything I liked. All I kept hearing from the gastroenterologist, which, by the way, guys, he was one of the best in the area, told me food didn't matter. Food did not matter. Number one, you can eat what you want. Yeah, I know. Crazy. And then number two.
Stop. Okay, yeah, keep going. But I want to go back to that. Let's go
ahead.
Okay, food doesn't matter. So what did he explain to you as like in the irritation or of reason? Like
I'm trying to think. He just said this basically happens to some people. I think he did say it was genetic. So he was a little right on that one.
More genetic.
I think he was saying more genetic. He didn't really know what the root cause was or the cause was. And all he wanted to do is, besides say the food didn't matter, was put me on pharmaceuticals. And the pharmaceuticals, the well-known ones for UC are called the biologics, and they're immunosuppressants. And from everything I researched, they do work to a certain point, and then the symptoms start to come back. So I didn't want to do that to myself. I felt really uncomfortable. So I decided to do this journey, mind, body, soul, tackle it that way. And that's when I started my podcast, Ulcerative Colitis, Autoimmune Healing Journey. And I documented everything through it. And that's what I have learned a lot of this journey is you have to have the three components, or, you can't heal the way you want to heal, because if you just do the one component, it's not enough. I mean, it's great that you have a great anti-inflammatory diet, but you also have to deal with emotional trauma that's stored in the body. You also have to deal with the right exercise. Are you moving your lymph? Are you jumping on a rebounder? Things like that. So I found that in the journey.
Oh yeah, no, that's great. And you were going to go to the second point. I didn't mean to cut you off and have you go into that, doctor, the reasoning behind that. But I want to say that we are three-dimensional. We're three-dimensional beings. We're more than three-dimensional. We the common thought is that we're three-dimensional, but we're actually five 5D now, or five dimensional. So there's so many other layers to our being, and that we can't just single out that one physical part of ourselves when we are looking at dis-ease. I like to say dis-ease. We're in dis-ease. So I want you to continue where we were. And I think that a lot of people are in the same place with medical, and there's nothing wrong with our medical doctors, but I think they're losing other areas. They're losing patients because of the narrow thought, or not bringing in the holistic approach. And as we see more and more people become sick or are affected by environmental issues and just food system and toxins, that they can't ignore this anymore, that there's all of these other integrative tools that we need to use to help heal people. So that's my little statement there about how we really need to get integrative. And it's apparent in your story. You used an integrative approach. You actually used more than, you were so detailed in how you helped yourself, which is so great, because you give people so much hope with, you can use this tool, you can use that tool. This is how I did it. But it's just, I've listened to your podcast, and I know there's just so wealth of knowledge there for helping people with this disease. Okay, so continue. You were talking about the second point.
He wanted to put me on the biologics or the pharmaceuticals, and I resisted that. So I said, no, I want to go on my own and do this the right way. And for me, I'm happy I did. I do have to give a little disclaimer here. I'm not a health professional. So anything that JoAnne and I may mention, if you want to attempt it, please consult with a doctor, just to save us both there, JoAnne.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, just to make sure of that. But yeah, so I decided to do this in a more holistic way and document it. And through the journey, I have listeners come onto my podcast, and I had a big moment happen in 2023. Now, what I'm going to do, JoAnne, is I'm going to go to 2023, but I'm going to go back to 2021. But I'll make that time marker, difference. Mm-hmm. But you're going to hear why. So in 2023, I have this listener come on. She's episode 41. Her name is Shelly K. Apodaca. She's amazing. She's a good friend of mine now. She is a light, I have to tell you. And she comes on. She tells this story about how she has something called CIRS, Chronic Inflammatory Response Syndrome. And I'm going, a lot of her symptoms sound like mine. It's a lot of very much IBD symptoms with the colon spasms and the IBD and the migraines and all these sort of things. And I was getting all these weird electricity nerve shocks in my body and all this kind of stuff, and neuropathy and the whole thing. And so she's telling her story, and I'm like, oh, that sounds so weird. It sounds exactly like me. And then she goes on, she tells this amazing story. And if you guys, I highly recommend listening to it. And that is, she and her husband took a trip to New Orleans, and they stayed in a mold infested home, which they did not know, mold infested hotel. They both came back to LA. She was living in LA at the time. And the husband does not have what's called CIRS. I'm going to get into that in a bit. The husband does not have CIRS genetically. She does. They think it's COVID, right? Because it's the midst of COVID. So they think they both have COVID. A week passes. They're back at their home. He's better. He's 100%. She's in bed for 2 years.
2 years?
Yeah. So she's in and out of bed for 2 years. So CIRS is, again, chronic inflammatory response syndrome. You have it, you get tested. It's called the HLA gene. Some people call it the CIRS gene as well. And it's extensive blood testing that has to be done to find it. So when you do CIRS testing and mold toxicity testing, it's 19 vials of blood. So just so everyone knows, in one shot. It's very, and I'm so petite. JoAnne, you've seen me online, but you haven't seen me ever stand up or anything. I'm really tiny. I'm 5'1". I weigh around 100 pounds. Yeah. So I had no problem with the 19 vials of blood. I must be a vampire or something. I had no problem with it being taken from me. I don't know why. They're like, do you want a cookie? Are you okay? I'm like, I'm totally fine. I drove my car and I was fine. But anyway, you should still be careful if you get 19 vials of blood taken from you at one shot. So I had tested positive for this HLA gene. Okay. And so anyway, with that, back to Shelly and her husband, you have to think about the fact that the husband doesn't have the gene. So that's why he was able to get back on his feet so fast and Shelley wasn't. And what that means when you have the HLA gene, it means that you cannot drain toxins like a normie. That's what I always say, like a normal person. So
Yeah.
I'm exposed to mold. My husband, who doesn't have CIRS, is exposed to mold or doesn't have the HLA gene. He'll be fine in a couple of weeks. I may be down for months. I may be down for years and maybe down for weeks. So you have to be really careful when you're exposed to these biotoxins. And through extensive testing, I found out that my root cause was mold toxicity. And I knew that because in my childhood home, which I was in for 18 years, and I was in on and off as an adult, just visiting or whatever, every time I went back there, I would feel sick. I'd feel like I had the flu. I felt like something was wrong with me. And it's really funny because, I'll just say this. Sometimes I did not have the best relationship with my parents. So I thought it was more emotional. I thought I was just being emotionally drained.
Yeah.
And then I realized it was mold toxicity. And I lived in a basement apartment that had a funny smell. It had a carpet that's mold. I had a sump pump. Sump pumps are well known for mold, which I know now. Remember back to that relationship in Australia, it was a very humid area I was living in, and he had old, disgusting carpeting, and he was getting sick a lot of the time too. And so were his daughters, now that I look back. And I think they had a lot of mold in that house. So I had that big exposure to mold as a child.
Yeah.
And as a young adult, and then I kept getting re-exposed. So I had a lot of mold in my body that I had to get out. So I found out that my root cause was, number one, I have the HLA gene. And I do want to say that the HLA gene, 25% of the world population has this gene. If you think of 25% of just the US, that's 80 million Americans that have this gene. They're now thinking that up to 40% of the population has this gene. They think it is responsible for autoimmune. That includes things like MS, IBD. They think it's responsible for cancer, certain types of cancer, autism, all of this. Now, the thing with CIRS is when it's activated, right? And mine was activated by mold toxicity. You have to find your root cause. That's the big thing. If you're feeling sick, you have to find your root cause. So another episode I point to, she's phenomenal. Her name's Allie, and she's the head of root cause for Crohn's colitis. I'm now a part of that group.
Yes.
And she came on to two of my episodes 79 and 80, and her story's mind-blowing. But she had said in the episode, and it stuck with me, and I used it as a title, that to me, IBD is not a diagnosis, it's just a symptom.
Just a symptom.
I glommed onto that. And then when you think about how the CDC changed that definition to an environmental disease, right, to biotoxin exposure, then it's all put together. It's huge progress in the IBD world. So saying all this, what you have to find is your root cause of IBD. You have IBD symptoms. So you have Crohn's, you have ulcerative colitis like I did. What is that root cause? That is the only thing that's going to heal you 100%. Because when I healed on my own, I got myself to around 60, some days 70%. So I did a decent job, but I did not get myself to where I am today, which is probably 95% healed since 2021, until I found that I had CIRS and my root cause was mold toxicity, and I was able to undergo a mold toxicity protocol.
Yes. Okay. And then that mold toxicity protocol, what did that involve?
Yeah. So I have to shout out my doctor, my mold toxicity doctor, my CIRS doctor. Her name is Dr. Peg. She is Margaret DeTulio of regenixhealing.com. She is on episode 43 of my podcast, and she's awesome. And I also have to shout out her daughter, who is health coach Ruth DeTulio. And I just did an IG live with her for a root cause for Crohn's colitis. So if you guys want to go on that and see her, she's amazing too. But Shelley had these as her doctors recommended. So I went and I got all the testing done and everything, and they discovered the mold and all that. And they put me on something called the Shoemaker protocol. Richie Shoemaker is the biotoxin illness, mold toxicity expert in the US. He is the godfather of all this, and he created something called the Shoemaker Protocol. And you can find out more about him going to survivingmold.com. That will really help you. But before I want to go to that, I just want to say a couple things about root cause. There could be many reasons for root cause. And if you go on to root cause for Crohn's colitis, if you go into that IG page, there is a great post on all the root causes of IBD. It could be anything from heavy metal toxins to mold to parasites. To Lyme's disease. Lyme is a big one, guys. And by the way, Lyme and mull have very similar symptoms. So you really have to dig and find out if you have Lyme or mold. There's something called actinos, which are getting more popular and getting more press. Thank God. Actinos are this invisible bacteria that 50% of the CIRS population has been plagued by, and it causes skin disorders. And the protocol for that is you have to go through a massive cleaning protocol. You have to clean your skin a certain way and it gets rid of it, but you really have to clean your home. So imagine having lice and how you have to really clean your home like that. It's very similar in that way.
Okay.
But it could be any of these things. It could be emotional trauma, which I'm going to get back to.
Yes.
So it could be emotional trauma. It could be, many of these, let's say 15 causes. So I just want to say that mold is not the only cause. It's one of the big ones. It's one of the 4 big ones if you ask Dr. Peg or Ruth, but it's not the only one.
It's not the only one.
It's not the only one. You have biotoxin illness, which can come in so many forms. So I just want to say that and put that out there. So with the Shoemaker protocol, what happens is basically, okay, here's where things get very nuanced, is if it is mold and you're being exposed, you have to get out of the exposure, because if you do not get out of the exposure, you are wasting your time and money on any protocol. You will not heal. And this is where Dr. Peg says on that episode of my podcast, where she says that this is where a lot of times the buck stops with potential patients, because they don't want to hear it. And I get it. I didn't want to hear I was infested with mold. Who wants to hear that? And all the marketing you hear around mold is like, oh, just bleach it and you're fine. Just paint over it and you're fine. No, you're not fine. It's a major epidemic. It's a major world epidemic. And if you really look this up, you'll see it's a huge epidemic. But Dr. Peg is someone who, she at least recognizes that you really have to go in and you have to fix this. And this is back to Dr. Richie Shoemaker, who made this protocol, and he recognized that as well. So when you do this, you have to start with something called, first of all, you have to get out of exposure, and that could be at your home, that could be at your work. And if it's at someone's home, it's not fun to tell someone they have mold in their home, and the mold remediation has to be done the right way. You have to know. Go ahead, JoAnne.
Yeah, stop there, because how do you determine if you have mold in your home? That people are going to think, well, I want to know right away. Like they're listening and they want to know. So how would you determine that?
So you can do something called an ERMI test. It's ERMI. And you can just look it up online. Just look up ERMI test online. And what you do is you pay for, I think it's like $180 or something, $150. And they send you a kit, and you can do one of two things. You can either swipe, like let's say wipe your window with a cloth, put it in. Or the most popular one is when you vacuum and you put the contents of the vacuum into the bag, and then you send it for testing. And they can tell you if you have mold and what types of mold, because you have to remember too, not all types of mold are bad for humans. Right. It's just certain types, certain species, certain genus. I'm going back to biology. I'm like,
no, that's great. No, that's true. That's true, because it's not all bad. We want to really make that clear that not all mold is bad mold.
Yeah. Not all mold, but the bad mold is bad. So you can do that. You can definitely do an ERMI test. That's a big one. You can also go to survivingmold.com and you can get a VCS vision test. Look in their store. It's $15, guys. It's the best $15 you'll spend. And it's a vision test. And if you fail it, then that means often you either have mold in your body or you're being exposed to mold. And that's a really good way to check for that too. Now that I've been healing on this binder, and I'll get to that in a second. Sorry, I jumped ahead, but now I'm healing with this protocol. I took the last VCS test and I passed it flying colors. So I was
Wait,
failing
tell us,
before.
I know that you know all these acronyms, but what is VCS?
It's like vision. I don't know right now off
You
the
know,
top of my
okay.
head.
Well,
Yeah,
we
it's
can link it.
vision something something. Yeah, but
Tested. Okay.
yeah, a
Cool.
vision clearance test. I can't remember off the top of my head. Sorry about that.
That's
But
okay.
I had been failing these tests since July 2023, and a couple of months ago, I finally passed it, which means that the mold is not 100% out of my body, but it's, let's say, 90% out of my body. So I'm able to pass it. So back to the protocol. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. So, okay. So you have to make sure you're out of exposure. There you go. Number one. Number two, you have to remove the biotoxins from your system. That's the biggest part of this. And how you do it is with something called a binder. And the
Mm-hmm.
most famous binder is activated charcoal. But the thing is each binder has a different charge to what it takes out, to what it
Yeah.
removes. So there's a parasite binder from, like, people know, from Cellcore that works really well. There was my natural binder that I never say the name, JoAnne, because I don't want people to mess with it, because you can really get yourself in trouble. So even on my podcast, I don't say the name of the natural binder I use, because
Okay.
it's, if people get a hold of it, because they can get a hold of it, they could, and I'll tell you in a second what happened to me. You can really get into, Ayurvedically, that disease toxic
Yeah.
state where you can't come back from. We don't want
Mm-hmm.
anyone to do that. So I went on a natural binder for, I want to say, 8 months, sounds about right. And it really cleared out the mold. A big part of it is you have to detox a lot. So you have to do a lot of sauna, a lot of sweating, a lot of Epsom salt baths, moving your lymph, right? So you're on a rebounder, moving your lymph, you're taking lymphatic system, you're taking brisk walks, you are doing the lymphatic brushing, all of that. So anything
Yeah.
that can detox, you have to. And that's important, because at the beginning of the binder, I wasn't detoxing. And I was just getting sicker and sicker. And then they said, no, 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 you have to detox. You have to detox. And once I did, I felt much better. So just make sure you're detoxing. So then what happened was I ended up moving up to the big guns binder. Now, the big guns, I can tell you the name of, because you need a prescription to get it. So that's fine.
Okay.
The big guns binder is called cholestyramine.
Mm-hmm.
And cholestyramine is 4 times as powerful to the natural binder I was originally taking. So that's why they build you up to it, because you can't just start doing it. They have to build you slowly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they have to build you slowly. And so now I'm on the cholestyramine, and it's been a journey. It's been a good journey.
Yeah.
It's been a journey. I'm dealing with a lot of neuropathy right now. It's the detox symptoms, because my nerves were hit very badly, my nervous system. And I feel like a Christmas tree lighting up at night is not a pleasant feeling. So I realized I took too much of the cholestyramine and haven't been detoxing enough. So I need to, go back to that and be a little more diligent. Now, with that natural binder, I was going too hard too fast. As Dr. Peg likes to say, you want to clean out a room of your body, and I started to clean out a wing of my body. So, like you said in Ayurveda, when you came on my podcast, you said when you do things like that, then you get this toxic overload, you get this
Yeah.
horrible Herx reaction, and
Mm-hmm.
sometimes you can't come back from it. I came back from it, and I recognized the symptoms that I was detoxing too hard, too fast. And I did it a few times on that binder, and apparently I'm doing it on this binder too. So I need to just learn my lesson and not go so hard so fast. But the cholestyramine has made a huge difference. So did the first binder, and I feel really good. So that's a big part of this, is getting on the binders. Another big part of it is making sure you're supplementing with whatever you need. That could be, for me, for example, that's omega-3s, that's zinc, that's, all of that. For some people, they have to go on a low amylose diet, so you can't have a lot of starches in order to get out the mold. So it just depends. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, I'm hearing so many big points about having like a guide. You need to have a guide. You can't do
Thank
this
you.
alone.
Thank
And
you.
so when you're bringing in supplements and binders and prescriptions, this is something serious that you just don't dive into taking into your own hands. That you had doctors and healers and people that were your guides, right? You never had just searched something on the internet. And I want to make that a big point, is that sometimes people search on the internet, I could do this, I could do that, and then they end up worse off. So, okay, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I think that was a big point to make, because you were naming a lot of the things that have to do with supplementation, which sometimes people just go down a rabbit hole and they find, oh, I got to try this because it says it's good for XYZ and it's going to help me heal my gut. And then they're taking all these things. They're not really knowing how to use them, and it can cause some damage. Who were your guides? Who were your doctors and guides?
So thank you for pointing that out, because that's something that absolutely you have to mention. I'll give you a quick story about that. One of the early binders that was recommended to me, if you looked on the bottle, it said take 4 capsules a day. Now, when I worked with the health coach, Ruth, and Dr. Peg, they told me, no, don't do that. Take 1 a day and see how you do. And if you have to even do half a day, take half a day. Mm-hmm. I did not do well on that binder. So even taking 1 was a nightmare for me. It had bentonite clay. For some reason, my body hates bentonite clay. I don't know why, it just does. But I was taking 1, had a terrible reaction. IBD symptoms came back. It was really bad for a week. And they said, okay, that binder's not for you. Imagine if I was not under proper supervision and I took 4 capsules, and I was taking 4 capsules for a week. I mean, I would have been in the hospital. I'm telling you right now, I would have been in the hospital.
Right.
So you are 100% right. Thank you so much for bringing that up. That's a really good point. So everything for me is under supervision. Yeah.
Okay. And like you said, you use different doctors. What were the best, I don't know if that's the right word to use, but the most successful guides that you have used along your journey? Like success as far as you getting results. Because I know that there's a lot of episodes, which I will say to the listeners, we will link all those great episodes that you mentioned in the show notes so that you can dive into those episodes that Jay mentions, and also the tests and things, because there's a lot there in the show notes. But yeah, go ahead and share some of those experts that you might have used.
Yeah. And can I give your listeners a quick tip before then, which is really good for those of you who listen on Apple Podcast now transcribes every episode. So you can also look there too and look at the little transcription. So that's really helpful too. That's been helping my listeners. Because if you're like, darn, I missed an herb or I missed an expert, well, it's there too. So, okay. Anyway, I digress. So the people who really helped me, Dr. Peg, Margaret DiTullio of RegenxHealing.com. She is a CIRS doctor. She is a mold toxicity expert. She also does a lot with Alzheimer's, which is really interesting. She does a lot with biotoxin illness. She works on root cause, finding your root cause, and she works a lot with inflammatory bowel disease. So I cannot recommend her enough. If you cannot find her, because now it'll probably take you 6 months to get an appointment, then I suggest starting with the first step of working with Ruth, who is her daughter, who is the health coach, Ruth DiTullio, through RegenxHealing.com. She's amazing. Between the two of them, they could rule the world, JoAnne. They really could. They know so much. It's insane.
Well, that's promising.
Yeah. And you can probably get an appointment with her within, a couple weeks, a few weeks. So it's much better. She has amazing prices. Her and Dr. Peg work within budget. So they really have the budget in mind. They have your insurance in mind of, what can you pay for? What can you do? Because some of this gets expensive. Love Dr. Peg. She is not cheap, just being honest. So that's why I do a combination of Dr. Peg and Ruth. So that really helps me too. Another person that I had on my podcast, you may want to take a look at, and this is episode 45, that is Jessica Johnson. She is my naturopath. She's located in Milford, Pennsylvania, just moved, and she is the wealth of information. She works virtually. You can send in a hair sample and she can test that and meet you virtually. And she is the first one who discovered the mold in me. And she's someone who said, okay, you're sensitive to this, take this out of your diet, put this in your diet. And that is really helpful, because JoAnne, you raised such a good point that I'd like to go back to about being supervised. People are always, and I'm the same, you guys, I'm exactly the same. And this is why I haven't gone on a good vacation in 40 years, is because all I do is spend money on health. It was so funny. I was looking at my bank account, JoAnne, and I was like, oh my God,
Yeah.
all my money is going to the health shit. Like
Yeah.
there's,
Yeah.
there's no like, I don't know, Cancun or anything. It's all going to health stuff.
But let me stop there. You can't enjoy your life if you're not healthy. And I
Amen.
think that getting to the root of this and taking time to eradicate it right now is really going to help you enjoy the rest of your life and know how to manage it. So, you know, health before wealth, Jay.
No, you're 100% right. Because the way my mindset is and what I tell my listeners is, this is the part of your life you have to do now, and it may last 4 years, 5 years, but then you have
Yeah.
30, 40, 50 more years to enjoy your life healthy. So I
Mm-hmm.
couldn't agree more. So yeah, I'm the person too who always wants to cut corners financially. I always want a good deal. I always want to do it. If I can do it on my own and not pay a professional, I will. But that is the worst thing you can do with IBD and mold toxicity and CIRS. And I'll tell you why, is because you will most likely put yourself in a position that is so bad that now you're going to be spending thousands on hospital bills, thousands on finding the right specialist because you've really messed with your system. A good example of that is, they always tell you with gut health, you have to have prebiotics, right, JoAnne? Always
Yeah.
prebiotics,
Right.
right? They shove that down your throat. And it's a good
Well,
thing to
pre and
pre
probiotics.
and pro,
Yeah.
but I'm going to concentrate on the pre.
Yeah.
But yes, pre and pro. And they always tell you have to eat sauerkraut, right? Now, I
Yeah.
was eating this sauerkraut. I was eating this sauerkraut without vinegar, which is the best way to eat sauerkraut, right? Just the cabbage and the salt. And I wasn't feeling well, but I'm eating the prebiotics. They told me this is what I should do, the kombucha and the prebiotics and the this and that.
Yeah.
Well, guess what? A lot of things with prebiotics that are fermented have mold. So I was just
Mm-hmm.
adding the mold to the mold.
Yeah.
And that is the danger. And then when I went and was supervisor, like, no, don't eat any of that stuff. Like, don't eat any of that. You need
Mm.
to get off all that. So that's a really good example of where you need to be supervised.
And I think that everyone is so individual. We are all individual, right? And we are in Ayurveda, you say, your individual energy pattern, because we are at the smallest level energy. Just we are in this dimension where we can see each other as solid figures, but we are just so unique in our energy pattern. So no one protocol is going to be the same protocol for every person. And I think that's where allopathic medicine sort of misses it, is they have these protocols. They just write the prescriptions. And I'm saying that we're so grateful that we have some of these medicines to save lives. So I'm not against that pharmaceutical approach, but the doctor or the practitioner needs to take the time to understand that every individual is so unique in the way they respond. Their body's going to respond so differently. So yeah, we need to take a step back, look at it, as a big picture and a holistic, integrative picture. And that, there are things that can help us heal, but we don't have to rush either. I think that's one point I want to make, is that I see a lot of people rush to what their doctor tells them to do. Let's take some space and look at the options. And that, if you didn't have that doctor's appointment yesterday and you had it in a month, you'd have a month of space. So let's just imagine that you have a month of time to really digest, no pun intended, but to digest the information and to think, okay, what do I think and feel about that? Touching base with your intuition. What do I feel about what the doctor said? And I don't think people do that enough. They just jump right on. I got to fill the prescription because my doctor said I had to. I have to use these Pepcid AC. I have to use the Tums to cure my, Band-Aid effect, right? So I love this, all of the information that you're giving, because it helps people understand that they have to go through and commit to a journey. It's a journey to heal themselves.
This is a journey. And I don't know if you wanted me to touch on the emotional trauma quickly.
Yeah, I do.
Okay, cool. So, all right, now I'm going to take you back in time. So we're in 2023. And this is, remember I said at the beginning of the episode, this whole catch 22, and I have a surprise for you guys. Okay. So actually, let's stay in 2023 for a second. 2023, I go to visit Dr. Peg. And by the way, you can work with her virtually. But I went to her office because I was going up to New Hampshire anyway. And she said to me something so just blew me away. And again, this supports that IBD is just a symptom. It's not a diagnosis. She said to me, I am telling you, in 2021, that was not a UC flare. That was a cytokine storm. And what it was a toxin storm that overtook your body, and your body couldn't take it anymore, all the mold. And that's what happened. But why did that happen, right? Why did that happen in 2021 if technically I've been exposed to mold since childhood? So why then? Go ahead.
Cytokines. Can you just give the listeners, I know about cytokines, but do you want to give a little one-liner about the cytokine storm?
Yeah, basically, I define it as a toxin storm. I don't know if JoAnne, how you would define it, but I define it as an inflammation toxin storm.
Yeah, over inflammation. Yeah, that's good. That's a good general way to explain it. But I know they'll be like, "What's a cytokine?" So, okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So basically, so I learned this. I'm shocked by this. I'm going, okay. So why did this happen? Now, let's go back in time to 2021. And at the time, I was getting some mental help because I had been sexually abused. Sorry, trigger warning here, from age 4 to 6 by a caretaker. And the memories started to come back in my early 40s. I had repressed all these memories and they started to come back. And it was really interesting because I always tell this story of when I bought this house. I live in this house now. My husband and I bought it. I walked into the house and that was around, that was been 2000, 2019. And here's what I think happened. Here's where I think things were unrepressed or were coming forward, right? Is I couldn't get over the smell of the house. I was like, oh, there's something familiar about the smell, but I can't put my finger on it. There's something familiar about the kitchen, but I can't put my finger on it. And I realized later on that it was pretty much looked like the exact kitchen where my abuser was, right? And also the smell of the house was almost the same, if not the same. So I think that kind of, smell can bring about memories, and that's what happened. So all these memories were brought forth, and obviously traumatic ones and everything. And I'm working with a mental health professional. And I think because all of this trauma was brought forward, that's what happened. I had the toxin storm, and that's what did it. And looking back, I mean, I'm glad it happened. Normally, you would want to work with a mental health professional and unleash these memories very slowly and do it very healthfully for the body. I didn't. I went at it, too hardcore, and that's what happened to me. But I think that's what happened is there was part of this where it was emotional trauma.
Okay, yeah, and so you still do attribute some of the disease part of it, the dis-ease part of it in your gut to what happened to you as a child. Even though you got to the root cause, you do think that it was all tied together. Because, go ahead.
No, I was going
originally when we had talked, we've been talking, Jay and I, for a couple of years now on this topic. And in fact, it's just 2 years ago, we did our episode on IBD Day. So it was just last week, right? In May.
Yep.
And now now we're reconvening here, but we had kind of dove into that discussion about unreleased trauma that we store in the body, unreleased, and how it can aggravate. So do you still put a lot of weight onto that area? Or would you say that, I just kind of want to hear your reflection now that you've kind of got through the whole healing process?
Yeah, I think I would put weight on the area. I think it was mold toxicity, obviously, but it was also, I would say one of my other root causes was the emotional trauma being stored in my body, and it was not being released. It was not being released through a mental health professional, through telling someone. I mean, I had never told anyone about the abuse until I was in my 40s. I held that in my body for years. That is not good, as you know, JoAnne. This is a really bad thing. So I think if you look back, there were, let's say, 3 root causes, right? So you look back, I have the HLA gene. I am genetically susceptible to all of this, right? Then it's mold toxicity. Then it's emotional trauma. So if you really look at it, there are 3 root causes that I have.
And often there isn't usually just one for the disease in the body. There isn't always just one thing. It's, an effect of all, well, again, because of our dimensions of our being, we have all this coming at us physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, energetically. There's all of that we have to take into consideration when we're looking at our health and well-being. So, okay. So so if you want to add anything else about trauma, because I stopped you in your tracks about the trauma, but do you want to add anything else about that? Or do you think now that you've landed on that and you've talked to mental professionals, do you feel good about that part? Have you healed? I know it's always going to be part of your being. It's part of, your makeup and the fabric of your soul. Obviously you can, but do you feel like you've healed that wound?
I feel like I am healing that wound.
Mm-hmm.
I would say it that way. And it's as I've gone on the cholestyramine, the big guns binder, I'm finding that I'm releasing more
Oh,
emotionally.
yeah.
And I've finally pinpointed some other abuse in my past by someone else,
Mm.
not this, and it wasn't sexual. It's more emotional, mental type of thing. And that's been something that I never could put the verbiage around because we didn't have the verbiage of gaslighting back in the day. And now we do, and things like that, things like that, narcissism,
Yeah.
gaslighting, all that. So now
Yeah.
that I can put that all together, I can say, oh, wow, I was also really abused in this situation as well. Wow, that's pretty, whatever. It's all relative, right? But it's pretty bad. So now, even though I feel like, yes, I have come to terms with the sexual abuse and I'm healing from that and I'm doing much better than I was in 2021, then this other layer has been unveiled. And so now I'm kind of dealing with this other layer and I'm dealing with this, I was saying about the nerves, right? I
Mm.
light up like a Christmas tree for the, it's so uncomfortable for the
Yeah.
past few days. That's the only way I can explain it. It's just like nerves all over my body. And Ruth, the health coach, wrote to me this morning and said to me, oh, that is, again, like I said, I'm detoxing too fast, but I also think part of it is just this recognition of even more abuse coming out and more emotional trauma coming out. So I don't think it's alone. And JoAnne, you hit on such a good point that I just want to say that you just said about how we need to approach this mind, body, soul. That's why we need the three approaches, because if you just do one,
Mm-hmm.
not good enough. And I
Right.
said to my husband yesterday, I said to him, I think I need to talk to a therapist again. I need to go
Mm-hmm.
to a trauma energy healer again. I need to go to a therapist again. And I need to really work through this, even if it's a few sessions. I need to work through this again. And that's okay. And that's okay. And the other thing I just want to say quickly is once you know your root causes or your main root cause and you have the knowledge, things aren't so scary. Things are, what works for you. I know that if tomorrow I go to a mold infested building, I know to call up Ruth. I know to call up Dr. Peg. I know to take the cholestyramine. I know to start detoxing the hell out of my body. I have the knowledge. And you also pointed out that everything is individualized, and that is so important. I say that to my listeners all the time, is what works for me may not work for you and vice versa. And that is so important. I had told you guys about the binder with bentonite clay. I have so many listeners who say to me, oh my God, bentonite clay has been a godsend for me. My body does not like bentonite clay.
Yeah.
So, it's so individualized. And I'm so glad you brought that up.
Yeah, and it is. And I want to go back to something you said on your lighting up like a Christmas tree, like energetic, like, you were feeling like the energy. Well, your energy, which we're going to have a podcast episode together on your podcast. So the listeners can go
Yeah.
listen to that
Yeah.
when we're going to talk about, the energy, and your energy is realigning. Your energy field is
Wow.
reorganizing. So you are healing your physical body, but as you heal your physical body, you're reorganizing your electrical, your
JoAnne,
energy.
this is mind blowing to me. Tell me more.
No,
No, this is
I
amazing.
I know you know this kind of stuff though already.
No, but I kind of don't.
Okay.
That's amazing. So I love
When
that
we get
idea.
into, yeah, you can
Yeah.
listen to our episode on Jay's podcast, which we'll dive into all of that. But that is a big thing that people don't even consider because, medical textbooks and mainstream medicine, at least in the Western world, doesn't even really tackle the energy field. And it's there and we can measure it and we can photograph it. And it's there. It's this thing that does exist, but somehow that we just continue to skirt around it. And that anybody who does work with energy fields is woo, it's not, that's
Yeah.
not, they have to get rid of that mindset I can't be more passionate about that because I've been in body work for the past 25 years, and there's so much more than just the physical that affects, your muscles and your tension. It's the energetics of you too that affect you. So no, this has been so great. There's so much more. I mean, we always have these discussions, or I shouldn't say always, but we have in the past on our podcast, and there will be more because there's so much to dive into. But I want to get what you can eat now. Like, what are you eating? How are you digesting? Because then people will say, well, you're at this point, which is great. It's like 95%. You said you feel like you're 95% healed. How are you eating and how are you digesting now?
That's such a good question because when you're in a flare, often you're just doing, steamed vegetables, soups, stews, anything that's really soft on the colon. You're doing a lot of bone broth. If you do eat meat, you're doing a lot of things like that, a lot of warm water. So you want anything that's really easy on the colon to eat and digest and all that. So now that I've been through this protocol, almost have all the mold out of my body, reorganizing my energy field, all of that. I still do eat pretty healthy. I still eat an anti-inflammatory diet the best I can. I do love sugar. Sugar is my soulmate, and I have to release that at some point in my life, which I still have not. Still like the ice cream, guys, just not going to lie. But I have been retraining my brain because I just want to add this really quick that because of the sexual abuse, a lot of times there's compulsive eating issues, and I have those issues. So, I have had to really retrain my brain in the past, 3 months of stop reaching for the ice cream when you go to the grocery store, reach for the grapes. And I've been doing things like that, and that's been really helping. So I eat really healthy, I eat really anti-inflammatory, eat a ton of vegetables, meat, starting to eat more fruit, that type of thing. But because my body has really so much healed itself to a great point that I am eating gluten again, not having any reactions to it. I don't eat a lot of it, eat a little bit of gluten, eating wheat, eating soy, eating dairy, again, a little bit of each, but I'm able to eat within reason pretty much anything I want.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's amazing. And that's like a whole nother episode too about,
That's a whole nother episode. And the thing I do stay away from is the industrial seed oils. I do not like them. The CDC, I believe was it the CDC? It was one of them who just listed under as a major factor of IBD, the industrial seed oils. Yeah. So they're it's what you get in a restaurant, guys: corn, canola, soybean, rapeseed, all of these horrible oils, safflower. So I stay away from that. So when I go to a restaurant, I basically keep it really clean. I go to a restaurant, for example, where they don't use any of that. It's just olive oil and butter. So that type of stuff.
Yeah, you have to really do your research on the restaurants that you go out to. And fast food, sorry guys, fast food restaurants, unless it's like an all new fast food restaurant, like, they have obviously the chains that are trying to become more mindful of ingredients, but really your run of the mill fast food restaurants are not the place to stop. And unfortunately, most of our country lives on them. It's the drive-through kingdom. Okay, so this was so good. Now let's talk about some of the resources you have on your websites. Let's talk about where to find you. Give me all of the things that will help our listeners.
All right. So you can start off by listening to my podcast. This is a wonderful podcast. And then mine's a wonderful podcast. So you can listen to Ulcerative Colitis Autoimmune Healing Journey anywhere you listen to podcasts. And the cover. The cover is neon green and it's me in a bikini. You can't miss it. So definitely look for that. That's the number one thing. You can follow me at Free Spirit Podcasts on Instagram. I'm trying to put up more and more there. So that's a big thing for me as well. And when you're on my podcast too, JoAnne, I think that's going to be your third episode when you come on for this next episode. So JoAnne has episodes on there. So definitely tune into that because they're awesome as well. And
no, we didn't have time to touch on this, but I know you dive deep into it in an episode, but I did want to mention your journey with the water fast.
Yeah.
So we'll just reference back to that episode that you do on your podcast about the water fast, because that's really informational and just so good for people to hear. And then you have a booklet that goes with it, your journal, right? So that's Jay's water fast journey, which is a whole nother journey. So
Which
we'll
is a
just,
whole different journey.
yeah,
So
that is a whole different journey,
yeah,
but you learned a lot through that. And it did, would you say that it did help you?
it helped me so much. And you guys, I did 2 episodes on that. I have a water fast journal you can buy in my store, freespiritpodcast.com, if you're interested. And it meant that I only drank water for 10 days. So nothing else, no food, no nothing. And you can see in the results in the blood test that some big results, guys. Really
Yeah,
good one.
that's, I know I'm excited for that, the results, because I didn't get to that part too.
That's
So
okay.
I will. All right. So we will wrap it up here. I can't thank you enough. This was awesome discussion. And yeah, follow Jay, and I'm sure you'll be back. So thank you for your time today.
I am so honored. Thank you so much, JoAnne. Thank you to all the listeners. And thank you for spreading the word about IBD and the root causes.
I do want to ask you one question. I want to ask, what's the number one nourishing thing that you've done for yourself during your healing journey?
Wow, the one nourishing thing I've done. I am going to say, I don't know how nourishing this is. I think you'll find this nourishing. I'm going to say just going easy on myself and stop trying to be perfect with diet. You'll never be perfect with diet, guys. Just FYI info here.
Yeah.
You'll never be perfect with diet. So I think that was a big one for me is okay, I'm never going to be perfect. It's okay that I'm not. I just got an email from my health coach this morning telling me I should be detoxing more and I should be doing this more. So obviously I'm still not perfect, and that's okay.
Yeah, right. Giving yourself grace and progress, not perfection. There
Love
you go.
that. Love that. There you go.
So, well, that's a great note to end on. All right. Well, thank you, Jay. I'm sure there'll be more discussions. Take care. Have a great day.
Thank you.